You ever look up at a dark rain cloud and just wonder, where does all that water even come from? It's like it just appears out of thin air. Well, today, we're going to follow its incredible journey from the ground all the way up into the sky and right back down again. I mean, it's a process we see all the time, but it still feels kind of like magic, doesn't it? How does water from oceans and rivers seem to defy gravity, rise up into the air, only to fall back down on us? So let's trace that exact journey together.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. First, we'll talk about why water is such a big deal in the first place. Then, we'll see its great escape into the sky. After that, we'll look at how invisible vapor turns into a real cloud and how that cloud leads to a downpour. And finally, we'll zoom out to see the whole never-ending journey and talk about monsoons, which are basically rain on the move.
Now, before we really dive in, we've got to understand the stakes here. Water isn't just, nice to have. It is the absolute foundation for all life on our planet, period.
I mean, just look at this number, 71%. Over 2/3 of our planet's surface is covered in water. It is by far the most dominant feature of our world.
And we depend on it for literally everything. Growing our food, having something safe to drink, every single living thing from the tiniest bug to the biggest whale needs water to survive.
Okay, so water is everywhere, and it's essential. We got it. But how in the world does it get from the ground into the sky? Well, this is the very first step in its journey, the Great Escape. Now, this escape has a scientific name you've probably heard of, evaporation. It's just the process where liquid water gets warmed up, turns into an invisible gas called water vapor, and then rises and mixes with the air. And you see this happening all around you, even if you don't really notice it. When your wet clothes dry on the line, that's evaporation. That puddle on the street that just disappears after a day or two, evaporation again. It's just water making its great escape. So this brings up a good question. Thinking about how it works, when do you think this process happens faster? In the heat of summer or the chill of winter?
If you said summer, you are spot on. The whole process speeds up when the temperature rises. More heat just means more energy, and that helps the water escape into the air much, much faster.
All right, let's move to the next stage. So all this invisible water vapor has risen high up into the atmosphere. Now what? How does it become a big, fluffy cloud that we can actually see?
It happens in a few key steps. First, that warm, moist air rises up. But as it gets higher, the air gets much, much cooler. This cooling causes the invisible vapor to change back into teeny tiny liquid water droplets. And finally, these droplets need something to cling to, so they gather around microscopic dust particles floating in the air, and boom, you've got a cloud.
That critical step, the moment the gas turns back into a liquid, is called condensation. It's pretty much the exact opposite of evaporation, and it is the magic ingredient for making clouds. So we have our cloud, and it's full of all these tiny water droplets. But how do we get from a pretty cloud floating in the sky to an actual downpour of rain?
Well, inside that cloud, it's like a big party. All those tiny droplets are bumping into each other, merging and growing bigger and heavier and bigger until the air just can't hold them up anymore. That's when gravity takes over and they start to fall. Here's a really great way to think about it. A cloud is like a giant sponge in the sky. It just keeps soaking up more and more water until it gets totally full. And just like a sponge, once it's too full and heavy, it has to let that water go. That release is what we call rain.
So we've followed a single drop on its wild ride. But maybe the most amazing part of all of this is that the process, it never, ever stops. It's all part of this massive, continuous loop.
So here's the full picture. Water evaporates from the surface, it rises and condenses into clouds, and then it falls back to Earth as rain, which is also called precipitation. That water then collects in rivers and streams, flows all the way back to the sea, and the entire journey begins all over again. And this whole beautiful repeating process has a name, the water cycle. It's basically the planet's own plumbing system, constantly moving fresh water from the oceans to the land and back again. Pretty cool, right? But clouds don't just rain right where they form. A huge piece of the puzzle is how this rain gets transported, sometimes thousands of kilometers inland. And for that, let's talk about a powerful example, the monsoon. The key players here are the winds. You see, clouds that form over these massive oceans, where most of the evaporation happens, get picked up and carried by these powerful, predictable winds. They act like giant conveyor belts for water. In a place like India, for example, these are known as the southwest monsoon winds. In the summer, they blow from the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, picking up enormous amounts of moisture and carrying those rain-filled clouds deep into the country. And right here, we can see the real-world impact of that. This is data from a town in Telangana called Sirsilla. Look at the difference in rainfall. In 1998, they got over 900 millimeters. But in a drier year like 2002, they only got about 600. For the farmers and all the communities who depend on that rain, that variation changes absolutely everything.
So, from a tiny sun-warmed puddle to a powerful monsoon cloud, this whole amazing journey of water from the earth to the sky and back again is powered by the sun and driven by the winds. It's the water cycle, and it's what makes all life on our amazing planet possible.